You're listening to the Drawing the Ideal Self podcast for September 2024. In today's episode, we're going to look at how to find constructs. It's a question that comes up from time to time with people who are very new to PCP, who want to think about how they're going to get a range of constructs, which will then be something that they can explore further. So the first thing is to go over the basics of PCP. The start of the academic year is probably quite a good time to do that, because some people are coming new to PCP right at the moment. So this is my interpretation of the theory, so you would go to Kelly for the original. But this is how I think about it. Kelly was very clear that the world is real, but that each of us will experience it as an individual. And from our experiences, we will develop our own set of personal constructs. And those constructs allow us to anticipate experiences and also to respond more quickly to them. So it's a big time saver having a set of constructs. You don't have to think too hard about what every single experience is. You're looking for the exceptions in interaction and life. The things that you don't understand, you will then have the time and energy to devote to understanding. Now, obviously, these understandings are personal. Therefore, they are neither right nor wrong. They are what they are. So a construct is a discrimination between two experiences or an experience and a number of others. Because to say an experience is something also implies that it is not something else. So if we say something is a fun experience, it also applies that there are things that are not fun experiences. And for me, I might call those boring. Someone else might call them frightening. It just depends on your personal constructs. So with construing, there are no right or wrong constructions. There are only constructions. So there are no value judgments. That's a job for society to put value judgments on things, whether it's okay for people to hold certain views and beliefs or not, and PCP doesn't have anything about that. What it is a way of thinking, okay, well, that's how the person sees the world. That's the sense they've made of their experiences. We are unlikely, actually, to be fully aware of all our constructs. And some of those constructs will be non-verbal, some of them will be pre-verbal. So there might be things about the way we move which are construed all of the time, but we don't put them into words. We don't need to. It doesn't mean we're not construing them. So if you're walking down the road and the pavement is uneven, you'll be construing that, but you won't necessarily put it into words and think, oh, that pavement is uneven. What you'll do automatically is adjust the way that you walk. So sometimes we're going to be very aware of only one end of a construct. So either what the experience is or what it isn't. And that's the bit that comes immediately to our attention. And we may not be fully aware of what the contrast is. So if we know that something is fun, we might not be able to put a word on what we mean by something that isn't fun. So a construing system is a dynamic set of constructs which have an organisation to them. So some are going to be more important than others. And when we have a new experience, we select the best fit from our personal constructs. Or if we find that they don't work very well, we'll make new ones. And gradually we'll develop more and more constructs, building up our construing system. So some will always be more important than the others, and the most important of these are going to be our core constructs. And if you listen to other episodes of this podcast, you will find that changing somebody's core constructs is really quite difficult to do and will take longer in therapy and require more sessions than changing something which is quite peripheral. And peripheral constructs are often things that people will actually be doing. So that could be, if you're thinking about a child doing your homework or not doing your homework, might be quite a peripheral construct compared with believing that school is important. So our construing system expands as we have new experiences. We add new constructs and we add new parts to our construing system, and the construing system may be reorganised so that we can accommodate new understandings of life and the world. It's a dynamic thing that's constantly changing, although some parts of it will be very stable and unlikely to change. So our constructs will be refined over repeated experiences. And we will go through a cycle of tightening and loosening. So that means that we will be making our constructs more refined so that it always has the same meaning and implications. That's a tightening process. But also a loosening process where a construct becomes more variable and more open to possibilities. That cycle is part of experiencing new experiences. That we might arrive in a new experience, let's say that is going to a party. We will have maybe a tight construct about what a party will involve, and it might mean we have to take a bottle of alcohol with us, that we have to dress up, that we will be going for a significant period of time and we can't leave early. Can't just leave when we want to. So there are some tight constructs that we might have about a party. Actually, when we get there, if we discover it's a very different experience and that a lot of people at the party are people we don't know, it becomes a party that we didn't want to be part of, we will construe our party construct again, and we'll look at it and think, okay, well, we have to take that into account, that a party might also involve taking drugs, say. And so we're loosening our construct of parties. So the next time someone invites us to a party, we'll be thinking, okay, what kind of party is this? So we've now got options for parties that we didn't have before. If we want to be in the business of helping people, we have to think about what Kelly would have meant about other people's construing and understanding that. So definitely exploring someone else's construing takes time, but it is essential to the process. We cannot know how they construe without investigating it carefully. Every person will construe in their personal ways, and we can never assume that we know. If we're going to help them or work with them, we need to understand their constructs and how they fit together. And when we're trying our best to understand, the person we're working with might understand themselves better through the process of explaining their construing. I see that happen regularly, that it's a kind of enlightening experience for people to look at their own construing. Whenever we're exploring somebody's constructs, we really want to know what we're talking about, and that means knowing about the construct's extremes, going back to what it is and what it isn't. And we can ask about their experiences in conversations, which deliberately do explore their construing. And with practice, this can be a very natural conversation. It doesn't have to be some kind of very tight structure. What it has to be is always on the lookout for the alternatives. So we call that in PCP the contrast poles. And that's quite different from CBT, which doesn't explore that in the same level of detail. We can use techniques which are less talk heavy and involve more activity, and those techniques then are more accessible to people who maybe need to move, maybe need less talk, maybe can't talk well, because you might be showing them pictures and asking them to make selections. And there are lots of these techniques that are available. If you go to the PCP pocketbook, you'll save a lot of time searching through things like Google Scholar or Athens or university catalogues to find PCP techniques, because usually they're hidden within papers or conference presentations rather than being, here is a new technique. There are some on my website listed as these are some techniques that you can use. And generally speaking, people in the world of PCP are pretty generous. But what is important, I think, is to notice what the range of techniques are and to select the techniques that might work for you and then try them out. I thought to illustrate this on the importance of not assuming that we can construe that person's construing, I thought we could look at an example. And the example is going to be for a child who's been referred for help with anxiety. So the child's name is Tom, And the referral says, Tom is in year 6 and he has difficulties with anxiety. He gets upset easily and worries a lot about things most children are not concerned with, such as death and illness in other people. He worries about getting things exactly right and is overly apologetic when he makes ordinary mistakes, like forgetting to put his clothes away or not tidying his room on Saturday. When I think back to his early years, he was never keen on social events and always asked big questions. Now, Tom is a pretty quiet child who likes his own company more than being in a large group, and is shy until he knows people better. At school, his teachers say he's doing well academically, but he can be easily disheartened if he does not get things right first time. He's quiet in class. We're worried about how Tom will cope in a bigger school next year, with more pressures coming when he hits exams. So this referral is the construing of Tom's parents. So all we know about is a minimal amount about Tom, and now we're going to think about what we would do about that. Now, quite often, people who are working in schools might go and do an observation. So let's assume that's happened, and that I went to observe Tom, and what I notice is Tom was working well during the lesson. He seemed to be concentrating and writing when he was expected to do so. He did not often speak to neighbouring children, but he did answer when they spoke to him. He did not put his hand up to ask or answer a question. Tom's body language or facial expression did not show any sign of him feeling anxious. Tom's teacher reported that the work he produced in this lesson was good. This is normal for him. My experience of doing observations in classrooms is that often the child that I've been asked to see is absolutely fine in the lesson that I observe. So I don't find that the most useful thing. But even more important than that, what does this observation tell us about Tom and why he does what he does? It's just a description of how he was in the day to an outside observer. It tells us nothing about what was going on inside and what he was thinking about during this lesson. It does tell us that he's good at his work because the teacher said so, and also that he knows how to behave well. I think that was already in the referral made by the parent, and I think the school would have had more to say about him if it was not the case. So in some ways, if I've spent an hour doing that observation, I haven't added any more information to understanding Tom. What I've done is confirm what they already told me. Now, it could be that I went to do an observation and I saw all kinds of things that they hadn't noticed. In my experience, that doesn't happen very often. So I would prefer to spend the time with the young person so that I can get to know them a bit more, or talk with their parents or talk with their teachers, because it's the construing of people which leads to the behaviour. So construing and behaviour are not separated by Kelly. We behave in a way that is consistent with our construing. So watching somebody's behaviour doesn't tell us how they're construing, except at a really basic level. The other thing that can happen is because we're construing using our own constructs, we will only be able to interpret what we see in the light of that construing. So I might say he was very well behaved, another person might say he wasn't interacting in the lesson and have their focus on that. It depends on the person who's observing. So observations alone are not useful, except in situations where there's no possibility of talking with the person, and then observation might be the only thing that we have. Then what we'd need to do is repeated observations and actually use a very systematic approach to try and work out what's going on with that person. And now we're going to look at 3 different options for what could be found out from a conversation with Tom about his behaviour and about the parents' concerns. This is really to focus on the fact that individuals are individual. And although they may all have shown this same behaviour of behaving well enough in the class, being quiet but getting on with their work fine, we don't know them. So we don't know what it is that's making them tick. We don't know what it is that's worrying them. So in a brief example, The first one is a conversation with Tom and me. So I say, so your parents and teacher have told me that not getting things right is something that bothers you. Is that true? Tom says, yes. I like to get things right because it's important. Why is it important? It shows respect for my parents and teachers, that I listen to them and try my best. What if you stopped doing that? It would be disrespectful. I don't think that is a good thing, and I don't want to be like that. What do you mean by disrespectful? Not listening, not repaying the effort they put in to help me, and I want to repay them. Why is that important to you, to repay them? I've seen what happens with disrespectful people. In the end, they get involved in bad stuff, gangs, terrorism, going to prison. So if you're disrespectful now, you could become someone like that later? I could. I don't really like saying that. But everyone like that must start somewhere. They must be disrespectful in small things first. Now here's another conversation with the same referral, still Tom, but a different Tom. So, your parents and teacher have told me that not getting things right is something that bothers you. Is that true? Yes, I like to get things right because it's important to my family. In what way do you mean? Well, my sister is training to be a doctor, a neurosurgeon actually. My brother is a scientist in America working on a cure for cancer. I want to do something big with my life so they can be as proud of me. Why is that important to you? It is a long road to something like that. I need to get started now if I'm going to be like them. I won't be a child for long, and time is running out. Do you think that might make you worry more about getting things right? Yes, I guess so. Mistakes will waste time. It sounds like time is very important to you. It should be to everyone, although I know not everyone thinks like that because my friends don't notice time like I do. They like playing more than I do. I think playing is a waste of time when I could be thinking instead. Is there something you think about a lot? Yes. Mostly how we could save lives, stop wars, or how I could invent things to help people. It sounds like helping people is a big thing to you, something you really want to do. Maybe we could look at how you could do that without you worrying about getting things right. And now here's Tom 3. So, same referral, same information, but this is this Tom's response. So your parents and teacher have told me that not getting things right is something that bothers you. Is that true? Yes, most of the time. What sort of things do you want to get right? I want to be a good person. What does that look like? If I filmed you being a good person at home, what would I see? Me helping out, getting chores done, not moaning about them. My parents need some help because they're getting older now, nearly 50. They could die soon. Did you know that most people don't die nowadays until they're much older, like in their 80s? Well, how come my mum is ill sometimes with headaches then? It could be a stroke coming. And my dad had COVID. Most people who have headaches or illnesses, they don't die. What if they're unlucky? We aren't a lucky family really. My grandparents are dead. My dad's brother died 2 years ago and my auntie has cancer. So maybe you are thinking about dying quite a lot then? Yes, I do, especially at night, sometimes in class too if the lesson is boring. Maybe we can look at that a bit more and see whether there could be a way that you could be less worried about health in your family. So in Tom 1's case, the same thing was a worry about being respectful or disrespectful. That was really important to him. And he was fearful that he might be on a slippery slope towards ending up in real trouble. So what we might do there is look in detail at being respectful and disrespectful and try to make it looser so that he doesn't have this idea that being disrespectful automatically leads to a terrible outcome for people. That it may be a momentary experience. Maybe it's not very nice, but it doesn't lead to problems that mean you're going to end up in prison. So in Tom 2's case, even with the same information, it's a very different outcome. that conversation. So he wants to make his family proud of him. And he's got an older brother or sister who are high achievers, and he's aiming to at least equal them so that the family can be proud of him. And he's got a thing about the importance of time. So mistakes waste time, and he's worried that time's going to run out, and that he needs to get started on this kind of ambition to do well right now, because he really wants to help people. So he thinks about some very big things. So stopping wars, saving lives, inventing things. So perhaps what we could do there is have a conversation about how he could actually do some of those things, and maybe have a timeline and think about at what point he can start to do some of the work that will help him to move towards being somebody who can help people in whatever way he chooses. But also an acceptance that some things are going to be very difficult for him to control because they're outside his control completely. But unless we look at that, we're not going to be able to help him to move on, because at the moment he's feeling responsible for lots of things and thinking how he can solve those world problems. And Tom 3 has a focus on trying to be a good person, but also worrying about his family dying. So he feels like he should help his family out because his parents are getting old, nearly 50, and they could die soon, he said. So there's something here about him feeling anxious about the potential loss of his parents, and he has some experience of that. You know, he doesn't have his grandparents anymore, his uncle has died, and his auntie is ill. So he is interpreting illnesses in the family as something that could be catastrophic. So in this case, we might want some factual information to help him to understand, and also to have an idea about how you can do things that help yourself, and dispute his idea that at nearly 50 you're going to die soon. This kind of thing can be quite tricky because we have no control over whether his parents might die. It is possible that it would happen, but it's unlikely. So we might need to help him to understand the likelihood of events, rather than the fact that when you've had a number of experiences, you're seeing a pattern there based on your interpretation of probability. So hopefully what you can see is there are lots of ways that you might want to take the work further with each of these versions, based on the construing that the child has expressed. These 3 different versions of Tom are not the same at all. And it's a reminder, really, that a referral is just a teeny bit of information. It doesn't tell us very much, and it tells us that referral told us nothing, really, about how Tom saw things and what was underlying his worries. Why was he anxious? The other thing is, we still don't know what it is that his parents are worried about in terms of secondary school. So that would be another conversation with parents, and different parents will give different worries for that. I think it's always a really good question to ask families to say, what are you most worried about? If you took the next 5 years, what's your worst nightmare scenario? And for them, they might say, well, he's going to drop out of school, and although he's bright, he's not going to do well then. If they say that, then one of the things you can do is to think, okay, so what support would you think he needed in order to stay in school? What kind of things would you need to be doing at home in order to be able to support him to stay in school? Why do you think he might drop out? Is it something to do with the other kids, or is it something to do with him? Is it that he doesn't see school as purposeful? Is it that, school is a bit childish somehow or another? So in every case, having a conversation with the person who is referred, but also with the referrers, is essential to the process. You can't skimp on that. The observation in comparison to these kind of outcomes told us very little indeed. It actually told us what somebody had already told us. So let's imagine I went into the classroom and sat there for an hour. I didn't find out very much that was new, whereas the conversations with those children found out a load of stuff that actually helped shed light on what we could do next. And that's what Kelly's focused on. is what are you going to do about these issues that somebody brings to you? It's not enough to say, okay, we understand them. The next thing is to think, okay, how can the person get better? How can they feel better in themselves and more comfortable with who they are and where they're going? That's the purpose of therapy. That's our intervention. It isn't enough just to understand it. So observing him and saying, well, he was like they said, to me, it wasn't a very useful piece of work. It used too much time for the amount of information that was gained. And supposing I'd gone into the classroom and I'd seen him scared and shaking and fretful, and the teacher then said, sometimes he gets like this, I would still have needed a conversation with him. I'd still need to understand what it is that's happening. So if you've only got a limited amount of time, seeing the child or young person or the person who is referred as an adult is going to be the most useful piece of work that you can do within that limit. That's my argument anyway. Okay, I will put the reference to the PCP pocketbook. It'll be in the show notes. But if you would like to get that, it's a very cheap book. So we deliberately publish our books and make them extremely cheap. Probably they're not even at cost. But we do it because we can and because we want people to be able to access the information in them. Our books are usually very easy reads, although, we're all experienced clinicians and we know what we're doing in terms of the work. What you can find with some academic texts is they're quite turgid and can make it a bit hard to access the information. And we've written our books to be suitable for people who are at the start or, ongoing in their PCP journey. They're not experts, but they want something that will help them to understand it quickly. So they aren't written in the traditional style. And that's very deliberate because we want them to be more accessible. Now, this sounds like it's been an advert now for the PCP pocketbook, which it hasn't. The purpose of this session was to say, where are you going to get those constructs from? Those constructs are going to come out of a conversation with somebody. And if you can't just have an ordinary conversation, can you have a structured conversation, which is where the techniques come in? In the end, there's got to be some sort of conversation because you need to know how the person sees things. And their constructs will be expressed by them. With experience, you have antennae that kind of get twitchy when there's something big coming up. So, for me, there were a couple of things with these examples, like saying we aren't a lucky family. That's an interesting thing for a child to say. It's got a whole lot of meaning in it. And that'd be something that I really wanted to explore. We aren't a lucky family. Are some families lucky? What does that look like? And is it only lucky in terms of when you die, or are there other lucky things about families that you do have? So is it totally that, we die young in our family and therefore we're really unlucky? Or is it that we don't have love in our family? That's a very different kind of unlucky. So the importance is, through that conversation, to get some constructs that you can then explore further. And at this point, in all these examples, we don't know the contrast poles. That would be the first step. So unlucky versus lucky family, if that's what the child said. Their contrast to lucky family might be something different. It might be all alive at 90. That could be their contrast. That's a very different construct from just saying lucky or unlucky. It's telling you what it's actually about. Okay, now there have been some previous episodes on constructs, and I would suggest you look through the backlist and see which ones could be useful to you. So if you can use the podcast much like you would use a reference book and go to those issues that you want to revise, if you like, all of them are listed on my website, so you can look that way, or you can obviously look on your podcast app and go through them. They tend to have titles which relate to what's in them. Occasionally it's a little bit cryptic, but mostly they're not. So you should be able to find them okay. If you can't, just send me an email and ask me to tell you which one might be relevant. Okay, Right, thank you very much indeed for listening, and I will talk to you again at the end of October. Okay, bye-bye.